Understanding vectors. A vector is a directed line segment. The length of the segment is called the magnitude, while the direction can be measured by an angle. So we will be measuring our direction by our theta, and it will be some distance from our x-axis if possible. And our magnitude is basically been our r, or our radius. Another notation that we use for magnitude is a double barred absolute value sign. So that stands for the magnitude of our vector v or u or whatever our vector is. Now, a vector is marked by an initial point, which we generally call P, and a terminal point, which we call Q. The P point is a point, and it ends with an arrow at our Q point. So that's kind of what it would look like. Now, given P and Q such that P equals the point P sub 1, comma, P sub 2, and Q equals the point Q sub 1, Q sub 2, we can find our vector. Number 2 then states it follows vector PQ is going to equal, we kind of do a pointy bracket or a triangle bracket, whatever you want to call it. Then we take our first Q point and we subtract our first P point, comma, our second Q point minus our second P point. So basically we indicate vectors with either a half arrow over them. If we're going from a point to another point, that's how we indicate them. Or sometimes it would be a bold letter like V or U or W. And it is indicated with brackets, with triangle brackets. So that's how we will denote vectors. Alright, so let's do some examples here. We want to identify the vector, find the magnitude and the direction. It will probably help us to actually sketch out what the vector looks like. So we have vector PQ. So we have point P, which is our initial point, and point Q, which is our terminal point. So my vector PQ is going to equal 5 minus 0, comma, 3 minus 0, which is 5, 3. So that is my vector. Now I want to find my magnitude. So we have the magnitude of vector PQ is going to equal the square root, because remember this is the distance, this is my r, of 5 minus 0 squared plus 3 minus 0 squared, which we already figured that out to be 5 and 3. So 5 squared plus 3 squared. Square root of 25 plus 9, which is the square root of 34. Now the last thing we want to find is the direction. Now the direction is an angle measure. So somehow we need to find that angle measure. Now to do that, we're going to have to incorporate our x's and our y's from our vector. Think of it as our x, y. This is going to be where our picture comes in handy. So if I'm sketching this out, I know my initial point, P, is going to be on the origin because it is 0, 0. So that is my point P. And my point Q is 5, 3. So it's right there. So my vector is going from P 2q with an arrow on the end. So I have the triangle, the right triangle right there. So now I can see it as this is 5, this is 3, and this is where my magnitude is, which is the square root of 34. That's where that radius, that r, comes in. So now if I want to find my angle measure, I need to relate my x and my y together. Relate that 5 and the 3. So that would be tangent of theta equals opposite over adjacent. Now I want it to be solved for theta, so theta is going to equal the inverse tangent of 3 over 5. And we kind of already talked about this. It's a little bit of a review. So now if we type that into the calculator, we get an approximation of 30.96 degrees. You're going to want to make sure that your calculator is set in degrees. So all of this, if we put it all together, our vector is vector 5, 3 with a magnitude of square root of 34 and the direction of theta is 30.96 degrees. Alright, and this next one, RS, so our initial point is R, terminal point is S, so that means our vector is going to be 7 minus 2, comma 7 minus 4, which is 5, 3. And our magnitude, the magnitude of our vector RS is going to be equal to the square root of 5 squared plus 3 squared, which is the square root of 25 plus 9, which equals the square root of 34. And now the next part, it's handy to sketch out a graph. So if we have this graph here, and we want to go to the point R, which is 2, 4. So that's my point R. And my point S is 7. 7. So it's up here. And that is my point S. So my vector looks like that. So I can draw myself a little sketch. And I have that. So I'm looking for my angle right there. So again, this time that was 3 and this was 5. So it's the same thing as it was last time. So my theta, or my direction, is going to be equal to the inverse tangent of 3 over 5, which again approximates to 30.96 degrees. So that means that we have our vector 5, 3, which was the same as the one before, so everything else should be the same. The magnitude was square root of 34, and my direction was 30 degrees, or 30.96 degrees. So that's your final answer. Alright, and this next one, QS. So Q is my initial point, S is my terminal point. So we have 7 minus 5, 7 minus 3, which gives me 2, 4. And that is my vector. Okay, so now I want to find the magnitude of QS. So that would be the square root of 2 squared plus 4 squared, which is the square root of 4. plus 16, which is the square root of 20. But that can be simplified to 2 square roots of 5. So that is your magnitude. And finally, we need to find our theta, our direction, which is going to be equal to our inverse tangent of something. So that's where we need to sketch out our graph. So we have the point 5, 3. So that point right there, which is going to be my Q, and the point 7, 7, which is my S point, and it goes from Q to S, so there's my vector, and this time my triangle will look like that, which that would be a 2 and 4. So now my inverse tangent is going to be of 4 over 2. So the inverse tangent of 4 over 2 approximates to 63.43 degrees. So what that means is my vector 2, 4 has a magnitude of the 2 times the square root of 5 and a direction of 63.43 degrees. And this last one uses the vector, or the points Q and R for our vector. So vector QR is going to be 2 minus 5, 4 minus 3. So that will be a negative 3, 1. And then I have to find the magnitude of QR, which is going to be the square root of negative 3 squared plus 1 squared, which is 9 plus 1, which is 10, the square root of 10. So that is my magnitude, and my direction. I'm going to start by sketching out a graph. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3. That is my Q point, and my R point is 2, 4. So I'm going to go from Q to R. So my triangle is going to look like that, and this is going to be negative 3 and positive 1. So when I'm finding my angle measure, I'm going to have the inverse tangent of opposite 1 over adjacent 3. And I'm just going to go ahead and put it as a positive 3 because it doesn't really make a lot of sense in this case to have a negative. So that's going to be approximately equal to 18.43 degrees. And that's your final answer. So that's it for understanding vectors. Go through some practice problems. Make sure you understand how to do all those things, and then you can take your quiz.